What is up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? My name is Oxtane, and welcome to the first of many TBC classic videos. This time we're focusing on Resto Shaman, as I have with classic, since that's what I play. That's also what I'm going to be maining for my spec in both PvP and PvE on my Shaman in Burning Crusade. However, I will, as I mentioned in previous videos, be making elemental and even enhancement guides as well. I'm not as well versed in that, I suppose, if you will. Elemental, maybe a little bit. Enhancement is prior to Cataclysm for me is kind of uncharted territory because I always played elemental as a kid, so a little less knowledgeable in those areas. But there is a thing called the internet and websites that you can use for reference. So that's kind of my goal, is to just kind of consolidate things in a way that makes it, from my own personal experience, what I can offer you guys from what I know from playing it, and hopefully just, steer people in the right direction that will help them be successful and help you guys be successful in Burning Crusade if you are playing Shaman. So in this first video, we're going to do the gearing, like I've done in the past with PvP and PvE. Now, after this, we're going to have another video, because I'm going to spend way too long on gearing because there's a lot of stuff to get through. And then we're going to have basically a breakdown of, how Resto changes in TBC, professions, just everything like that. And so in this video, we're just really going to touch on the gearing, maybe a little bit on the talents. But for the most part, it's going to be just like my other videos, where it's really just touching on the gear, right? And then we'll save all the other stuff for part 2, so to speak, where we cover what's different about Resto Shaman and TBC, things like that. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. So there's a new website now, whereas I've used 60 upgrades in the past. For Classic, there's now a new website that is 70 upgrades. That is for TBC. Still, some things are kind of in development with it looks like, but for the most part, everything's pretty much functioning on it. And you can break down everything from phase 1 to phase 5, just like you can with Classic all the way through. So again, really, really good tool. I'll link all the sets I made in the description below, but I'll also just have a link to the website in general where you guys can make your own sets, play around with things. Really, really, really good, underrated resource to just kind of pick and choose what kind of gear you want. I'm also going to leave a link below to Legacy WoW, the website. They have a great list of Prebis items that is for all 3 Shaman specs, so check that out. It'll be linked to the Resto one, but if you just scroll up on the same page, you'll have Elemental and Enhancement, and you can check out that resource as well. So you can kind of cross-reference those. That's kind of what I did with this to a certain extent, but I do have some experience knowing what gear is going to be good early on. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So starting off, just like in the last couple videos, I've made several pieces. So we're going to go over all the Prebis sets first, and then I have actual just phase 1 bis sets and stuff that we'll go over, and we'll touch upon all the different items and things like that. So starting out, a lot of the things you're going to notice before I get into the nitty-gritty of the gear specifically is there is a lot more options than you might imagine. But on top of that, there are several that are locked to professions, which I'm not going to cover as much in this video, because in the follow-up part to this, I'm going to cover like what professions you should take, what kind of stuff you can craft with it, because there are several really bis items for Resto, from both leatherworking and tailoring, and even engineering if it's in the game at the start, alchemy, etc. Like there's pieces that we'll go over in that video, so I'm not going to focus as much on the profession stuff in this video. I'll mention it, but that's more of the second part. So for this video, primarily we're covering dungeons, heroics, you know, Karazhan, Mag Lair, Gruul's Lair when we get to beyond Priebus. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that little disclaimer out there. Okay, so I picked in this, obviously we're not going to go over like, you know, it's going to show Karazhan items and things like that. I can hide it, but then as soon as I go to the next set, it's just going to show it again. So there's no point in me hiding it. So, you know, ignoring all that, Karazhan gear, badge gear, and for the most part, I pretty much with Priebus gear didn't really include any heroic dungeon gear. This is like very baseline, like Priebus, like getting your gear for like, you know, the first few days, week of the expansion, depending on, you know, how fast it takes you to do everything. So, you know, very bare bones stuff. A lot of the case in the Priebus stuff is just very, the blue gems, things like that, not like Bis gems or anything like that in these gear. So speaking of tailoring, the reason why I put this helmet on here is because you don't actually need tailoring to use this one. There is a separate set that you need tailoring to use. This is not one of them. This is basically like Bloodvine for healers, except, you know, obviously with Bloodvine and Classic, you can use the gear. You just don't get the set bonus unless you have max tailoring, right? And it's the same thing with the White Mend hood and pants. It has a 2-set bonus, but you need 350 tailoring. So obviously you won't be getting that if you don't have tailoring, but you can still use the piece, and it's still basically the best thing you can get outside of raiding for phase 1. It's 79 healing and 11 MP5, 15 and 15 stamina. Obviously has 3 sockets with a bonus of 4 int. So the thing with sockets too is we'll get into good sockets and everything. I mean, it's pretty obvious once you actually play the game, so it's not too much worth going over. But again, we'll cover sockets and everything in the next part of the video. We're pretty much just again gonna solely focus on gear. So White Mend hood here, that you can get somebody to craft because it is a BOE. You don't need, so again, just like Bloodvine and Classic for, you know, casters, same thing here. You just don't get the set bonus. Outside of that, like dungeon loot, probably the best helmet you could get is Hollowed Crown. It's just really, really good, and it has a blue and meta sockets. Now, meta sockets are really weird, but again, we won't really get into that too much. And it's still a really, really good helmet for sure. The Moon Glade Cowl as well from the Botanica is much the same. It's obviously meant for druids if you look at the set bonus and the fact that it has like every stat, which is kind of funny. But yeah, and then here's a leatherworking helm as well, one of the leatherworking pieces that again you can get crafted, and you can see how good it is. Now a lot of these pieces have, you know, more int, more raw healing, more MP5, things like that if they don't have a socket. So most of the time it's close in value even to things that don't, you know, things that do have sockets over things that don't have sockets. But generally things with a lot of sockets are just going to be stronger, especially when you get the better pieces and the better sockets. It's just going to, most of the time, scale a lot better, obviously. But it still shouldn't discourage you, especially considering how early on in the game this is. The Living Dragon Scale Helm is really, really good. So it's definitely worth it. Arcatraz has a decent helmet, but this is mostly spell power. And again, like a warlock. So a lot of these are like specific class items, but they're not locked to a class. So don't let that discourage you from getting certain items if you want it, right? Or like this one's for Ellie, but like, you know, it also depends again, like, are you coming from the perspective of, you know, do you have a T3 like I do, or is this like your new main that has like basically no gear? That's like a boosted 58 from the pre-patch thing, right? So these are all things to consider when gearing your character. Like some people just have different options than others. But obviously, if you're doing dungeons or you're doing a quest and you come across something that's an upgrade, you're gonna use it, right? So probably don't need to really go down the list too much, but I just wanted to cover a couple different items. So neck piece is pretty cut and dry when it comes to the Prebis. I mean, you can see Amulet of the Fallen God is up here, which we'll get into like classic items in a bit for sure. There's really two best options when you, again, not really considering like heroic dungeons or anything like that. And it's Natasha's Guardian Cord. It's from a quest in Blade's Edge. And it's just 10 int, 55 healing, and 6 MP5. So it's probably your best Prebis neck. Another good one is from one in Netherstorm as well. There's a quest, which is 15 int, 55 healing, and 10 spirit. It just obviously doesn't have the MP5. So it is a little bit weaker, but it's still really good. And then there's like one from Akendune as well that's pretty decent. So, but you can see a lot of like Nax and AQ and stuff stuff like that. I mean, even better than like some of these Karazhan necks. So there are a couple slots like that we'll get into. Neck is definitely one of them, where at the beginning, outside of rating, maybe not as great of pieces. So if you are somebody that has Amulet of Fallen God from AQ, like you're probably going to be using that until you get into Kara or Magslayer, right? So that's something to consider. Also, world bosses, I will cover a bit. Again, I'll cover it more when we get into the actual BIS set, because in pre-BIS, like, you're probably not going to be killing world bosses, right off the bat. So again, not really worth mentioning as much. So shoulders, again, excluding the tailoring piece, which we'll cover in another video, and that's again like BIS more than pre-BIS anyway. The hollowed set in general is obviously meant for priests, as you can tell by the set bonus. But again, like it's just such a good set in general that, again, like don't let that discourage you. And if you're in a dungeon group, like, and you're resto, you're not gonna have a healing priest more than likely in your group. So you know, you're going to get these pieces regardless if they drop. So don't feel like a little loot gob or anything. Like, they're just as good for Resto Shaman, even though you don't get the set bonus. But it really doesn't matter anyway, since the items are so good in themselves. So the whole hollowed set in general, we covered hollowed crown. The pauldrons are also really, really good. Outside of that, these from the Mechanor are really good. These from Heroic Mana Tombs are good. And then these from Shattered Halls are like, you know, this is kind of when you get into the territory of like, you know, you there's only so many actual resto pieces, because this is like Ellie. You know, this is, again, one of the Moonglade items. So, you know, again, like after a certain point, you only go so far down before the pieces you get or just really aren't that good. So that's something to keep in mind. But I would say Mechanor, these shoulders, these Moonglade, or these from Old Hillsbrad. But yeah, more than anything, Shadow Labs in general drops a lot of really, really good pieces outside of Heroic even. I mean, obviously the Heroic one, the Mace, which we'll get to, but Shadow Labs in general drops a lot of really, really good pieces. So for Cloak, it's basically High to the Wild 2.0, except it's not crafted. It's just a world drop. So Life-Giving Cloak is not only pre-BIS, but just BIS pretty much just for phase 1 in its entirety. 64 healing, 5 MP5, 13 int. So again, it will fetch a pretty hefty price on the AH, because it's pretty much BIS for every healer. I mean, obviously they're carrying over gold from Classic, so for a lot of people, I'm sure fetching a hefty price won't be that bad. For people that don't have as much gold, I'm sure the beginning of TBC is probably going to be kind of interesting with some of the prices that things will fetch, I'm sure. But we'll see. There's also a good tailoring cloak that, again, you could get a tailor to make for you. No int, but still 59 healing, 7 MP5, so still really, really good for sure. Those are really the two options, either, pay out of pocket or pay out of pocket, but for less. And you can really see it's not that much worse. You're just losing out on the int and 5 healing, and you actually gain 2 MP5. So it's really not that much worse, and this white remedy cape is going to be a lot cheaper. So definitely can't go wrong with that by any means either. Because outside of that, like, pretty much everything else comes from heroics, badges, Karazhan, Cloak of Suturing from Nax, and then this from a quest as well is actually pretty good. Or this one from Shattered Halls is not bad either at all. So it's really, only a couple options as far as cloak is concerned, but between the top 2 alone, very accessible, so it shouldn't be a slot that's too hard to fill. Cloak, or I'm sorry, not cloak, chest. So a lot of these are profession ones, again, which we'll cover. As far as other stuff, we have, again, another hollowed piece from, once again, Shadow Labs. Shocking. Really good. 3 sockets, 57 healing. Definitely not bad by any stretch. Now, this is from blacksmithing, which we will cover again because you don't need this profession. So it's just one of those crafted pieces that you can buy again. Think of this one like, I think it's the red dragon scale chest piece from Classic that is basically like Robes of the Exalted except with no int. This is basically that type of item where it's a lot of healing and a lot of MP5, but no other stats on it, but it's still really, really good for sure. So this could be something that you want to chase too. We'll probably have a decent price tag on it, but all in all, shouldn't be like too difficult to buy or obtain outside of that. So it just depends on, do you want to gear yourself more from dungeons and quests, or do you want to gear yourself more from just, paying out of pocket? Because pretty much every slot has something that you could just buy. So it is kind of, this is where we kind of get into more modern WoW territory, so to speak, where, there's just a lot more options and a lot more slots, and you can kind of, at least at the beginning of the game, like very beginning of the game, you can kind of pay your way to getting some of the better pieces, for sure. But others are locked behind actually needing that profession, right? But this is not one of them, obviously. Another one from a quest that's really, really good, actually, is it's either a quest or a rare mob. I can't actually remember. But Void Slayer's Tunic, it's Netherstorm. This is actually really, really, really good as well, as you can see. Debatably better than Hollowed Garments. It kind of just depends on your sockets and everything like that, but it's really, really good. So I'd really say these 3, the Earth piece, the Hollowed, or the Void Slayers, are all ones that relatively easily you can obtain. I mean, obviously there's another Moonglade piece, things like that. So because as you get further and further down, it's like Heroics, Karazhan, Honor. Another piece off Murmur from Shadow Labs is pretty good, and then one more thing from Blood Furnace. So, there's several different pieces, really. Chess piece is one that does have a lot of different options, even outside of professions, for sure. Bracers is one of those spots where outside of professions, specifically leatherworking, There really isn't a lot. The best one for the phase is Keepers of Time Exalted, but obviously that's not Prebis. So really, Prebis, if you have a pair of Bracelets of Royal Redemption from AQ, those are actually Prebis for phase 1, outside of, obviously the raid and doing like heroics and rep farm and things like that. So Prebis bracers are actually these from AQ, which is pretty funny. So if you have those, hang on to them. Outside of that, these from Black Morass are pretty much as good as you can get. Bracer is a really weird slot. There's not a lot outside of like heroic dungeons. There's one from Sethic Halls that again is a heroic piece, but it's really not even that much better than this one from the Black Morass, because that one also has MP5. Your tier 3, oddly enough, are pretty good. There's another tailoring piece that you can get crafted, but it's spell power. So like, outside of that, another spell power one. So really there's not a lot in the bracer slot. So again, either farm out AQ now maybe if you want to save yourself a slot. But these from the Black Morass are solid. Outside of that, until you get into heroics and some later game, end game content, you might be struggling to fill your bracer slot. I'll say that much for sure. You might have to go with like an Ellie, spell power one, because there aren't a lot of really easily obtainable good ones from a lot of dungeons. So weapon is interesting. So as far as Prebis is concerned, probably the best one for sure is the blacksmithing hammer, the Hand of Eternity, which in all the research I did, I'm almost positive is a BOE. I mean, it says a BOE on the website, but sometimes it's weird. So as far as I know, because I tried to double check this to make sure, you can get this weapon even if you are not blacksmithing. Obviously, you have to be blacksmithing to make it. But yeah, so this is definitely the best weapon you could get for sure. I mean, 317 healing, 7 MP5, 20 int is pretty insane. So again, obviously the best one that is like very notoriously the best is the one off Murmur, which is the Shockwave, mace. But I mean, really, if you compare these stats, they're really not like that much better or worse than each other. You get 6 MP5 with the Shockwave, but you lose 20 int, but you gain 24 stam and you gain some crit. Now crit isn't as good. It's probably your least important stat to look at for Resto Shaman. Just like crit isn't really that important for classic Resto Shaman. Much the same is true in TBC out of everything. Haste rating, healing MP5, and spell crit is pretty much the least of what you would want to like look for, at least in PvE. But that being said, these are debatably like as good as each other. In my opinion, they're pretty much interchangeable. They're pretty much dead even. It really just comes down to preference. Obviously with the Shockwave, it's just a drop off heroic Murmur, so that is maybe a little bit not necessarily more obtainable or accessible, but you don't have to like pay for it, right? Whereas Hand of Eternity, you're probably gonna have to pay quite a bit of gold to get your hands on. So that's something to consider for sure. And in the event that I'm just wrong and you need blacksmithing for the hammer, then I'm stupid and just go for this one. Okay, but as far as I know, that is not the case. So some other stuff, there is a world drop mace that is also really good, that isn't even that much worse than either of those. But again, it is one of those BOEs that's just going to be a lot of gold. So that's something to keep in mind. There is some stuff, staff from the Scryers, but by the time you get revered with the Scryers, like, it's probably to the point where you really don't need this in all likelihood, um, but it is there. Um, and then there's also a good staff out of the Black Morass as well. Actually, really good staff. Um, so again, it just depends on what you have. Um, because if you have something like, let's say, Hammer of Twisting Nether, it's better than the staff, and it's a one-hander, right? Um, but also a really, really popular item that is also a world drop that's going to be cheaper. Um, is Essence Focuser, which is still really, really good. 227 11 MP5. This is a really, really popular one for Prebis. And again, it is just a world drop, but it's a cheaper world drop. So it's going to be cheaper than Hand of Eternity. It's going to be cheaper than Sumin, which is also a world drop. And you're probably going to be able to, based on all the competition in those slots, this is going to be your best option for sure. So definitely look out for that. Shattered Halls also has one that's like basically actually better than Essence Focuser. So if you happen to get lucky in Shattered Halls, which will probably be one of the earlier dungeons that you'll do, you might get lucky and get this, which is really good. Mechanar as well has one that's like very similar. Steam Vaults has a staff with 227. So you do have plenty of stuff to choose from for sure. There's also this from a quest. So, you have lots of different options as far as weapons are concerned. It's really something that there's just a boatload of weapons that you can choose from even in Prebis. So definitely shouldn't have a hard time too much filling that slot either. Between all the different dungeons, I mean, there's basically a viable weapon almost from every single dungeon, and then like a couple quests plus the world drops, you're gonna be fine. So Offhand is also a slot where I mean, you can see the Nax shield and the Nax Offhand are like almost up here with like some of the best gear for the entire phase. So it is one of those slots like wrists, like the trinkets, which we'll get into, like neck pieces, that there's not necessarily a lot early on, because you can see, badge gear, Maglair, Kara, Nax. Ignoring that, we have Hellfire Ramparts Heroic, which will probably more or less be the first heroic that you end up doing. So you could get this relatively early on for sure once you get the Thrallmar rep. But outside of that, you have Cenarian Expedition Exalted, Karazhan, more badge gear, another heroic, Sartor's Might from AQ, which is actually hilarious, Slave's Pen heroic, the AV offhand, the one off Noth. So, and then finally, we're down to like something that isn't bound to rep or a heroic, which is Crystal Pulse Shield. So it's pretty much worse essentially than like a lot of offhands from vanilla at this point. But again, not everyone's going to be carrying over their characters or have those items. So those are all things to consider. So this is a world drop that probably won't be too expensive. For sure. I don't think it's like a super rare drop either. I mean, it's not an epic world drop, so always the blue ones, no matter how good they are always going to be cheaper. But this is probably like just raw, just availability. This is going to be your best Prebis. Outside of this one as well from the Arcatraz, which is pretty much just as good, but it's not a shield. I always like a shield. I'm very biased towards shields, but you can also enchant shields, right? You can't enchant an offhand. So that's another reason why shields in general are just better, especially in TBC, because you get an enchant on shield. So whenever you have the option of getting a shield or getting an offhand, try to get a shield whenever you can. But sometimes you just don't always have that option, or you don't win the roll. So, it's always nice to have options. So really these two for sure. Outside of that, there's a nice one from Shadow Moon Valley, from a quest that is, again, like very, very close. And that's really it, because everything else is like, again, heroic Kara. Another thing from Shadow Moon Valley, but it's not actually like Resto specifically. It's basically an Ellie offhand. Um, and then there's this one from Terrakar Forest Quest, which actually, all things considered, for a green is a really good green. Um, so that should give you a good sense of like all the different items that you could get for sure. Okay, so we're done with the first half. On to the second half here. So we have quite a few different things. So here's one of the leatherworking pieces that you can make. So again, this is one that you can buy that you don't need leatherworking for. One of the few leatherworking pieces that you don't need leatherworking for. And these are basically BIS outside of rating definitively. They're really, really good. And definitely probably the best you could get. Outside of that, the Botanica drops these really good ones. So outside of those gloves specifically, these are the best for pre-BIS. Because Karazhan and your tier gloves are like always, the best options. But, obviously this is pre-BIS. So the Steam Vault also drops really good male ones. These ones I really like. They have good healing, they have MP5, they have good int, and they have stam, and they're male. So these are kind of my personal recommendation outside of Gloves of Living Touch. Because again, not everyone is going to have that deep of pockets, and if you do have, like, let's say 6,000 gold, 5,000 of that is going to go towards, well, actually more than that if you buy regular flying on top of that. It's pretty much all going to go to your flying. So then you're going to be left with like no gold after that. So you're going to really need deep pockets in TBC if you really want to purchase a lot of those items. That's why I'm trying to put more emphasis on, quest gear or dungeon gear, because that's going to be most people's scenario, including myself. Like, I'm, gonna save up my gold for my epic flying, and then, I'm not really gonna try to buy a lot of pieces because I need that gold. So, yeah, I got your back. So, these Surgeon Mitts as well, from the Blood Furnace are also pretty good. And then, from there you pretty much just get into like Ellie gloves from like Hellfire Ramparts or Old Hillsbrad. So really it's the leatherworking oil prints gloves here. It's the Botanica gloves, it's the Steam Vault gloves, or it's the Blood Furnace. Like, it's pretty much those four are definitely the best options for sure. Belt is another one of those slots that is really weird. So with tailoring, you get this one that you can have outside of tailoring. It is an Ellie belt, and like, a Shadow Priest or a Mage or whatever, like, just a caster belt. So this one is going to be expensive and well sought after, but you can get it, and it's still probably better than a lot of pieces that you're going to get, because there just aren't a lot of good belts. So even if it is damage and healing, it's also some crit, and it's 2 sockets as well. So you could put in your BIS sockets in that slot and have like upwards of like 65 healing. So it's really good. It's still basically the best option you could get, again, outside of having Mooncloth tailoring and making the belt. So this is a really good one, even though, it's not outright plus healing. Because, again, something like Grasp of the Old God is, like, still basically the best piece you can get outside of this, which, like, debatably, it's actually better in some ways. So that's another classic item coming through, because then you have Heroic Mana Tombs, Heroic Slave Pen belt, which are both really good, but obviously they're from Heroics. This one can also get crafted through leatherworking, and then obviously you won't get the set bonus because you need leatherworking from this, but this might be like a relatively cheaper piece that you could get. maybe. So really the best one is really going to be from Blood Furnace, and it's really not even that good. I mean, if you really look at it, like only 18 healing, 6 MP5, and 2 sockets. So it's really not that good, all things considered, but it's not bad necessarily either. Core Hound belt from Classic is still, I mean, really, if you look at the stats, like it's pretty much better than even this Gale Storm thing. So, I mean, if you still have Gorehound belt, like hang on to that. This one from Caverns of Time is just MP5. So, in my opinion, with 2 sockets, it might be worth, but it's not as good as Gale Storm or anything like that. And then tier 3, which is pretty funny again. So a lot of these are like the Vecnalash belt, like again, a lot of these slots are very like monk-esque in terms of upgrades. And belt is probably the one that is hardest to fill out of any slot, in my opinion. It's just, again, like scrolling through, seeing the options where they come from. Not a lot there before you get into heroics, for sure. And even when you get into heroics, still really not that much. So pants is interesting. So again, the White Mend set is, like I went over with the hood, is usable even if you are not a tailor. It's just going to be more expensive for sure than like other items, especially considering how good they are. Now, if you are a tailor, obviously it's a no-brainer. Like, they're so good, and you also get the 2-set bonus, which is 10% healing based on your total int, which is actually insane, really, when you think about it. So, if you can afford these, even if you're not tailoring, still would definitely recommend that. Outside of that, a world drop, yet again. So, again, we're getting into the territory of, you know, any oil princes at the start of TBC, because holy shit, you're really, really gonna need gold in a lot of these slots where there's like, at least at the very beginning before you get like rep to do heroics and stuff like that, right? But if everyone's like doing dungeon grinding while you're leveling and stuff like that, might, you know, be a quicker timeline than I'm imagining in my head, because I really haven't played TBC since actual TBC. So everything I know is from then or just research I've done on my own. But that's obviously flawed in some way, right? So, yeah. But so these are insane. I mean, 118 healing's pretty bonkers. Then you have some heroic stuff. These from Steam Vault Heroic are actually really, really good. A piece from Kazakh, which, you know, we won't go over. And then these, which are also tailoring, much the same, which these are basically the caster DPS counterpart to the White Men set, but again, they're going to be even more expensive, debatably. And again, yeah, so maybe don't necessarily go with that. The Blood Furnace, these are actually very underrated, because they do have 3 sockets and decent stats. So these are from Blood Furnace. So you might get these pretty early on. Also, these from Hellfire Ramparts are really, really good as well. So you do definitely have some options. It's just they're not widely available, but they definitely are there for sure. So Hellfire Ramparts, Blood Furnace, like these 2. And you're probably going to have earliest access to those, obviously. Like, they're going to be, like, the first dungeons you're really doing in the game, more than likely. So, you're even more likely to... And if it's anything like Classic, where we're running these dungeons, like, you know, 10, 20 times before you move on to the next one, you're just going to see, like, all these items drop. I mean, they are larger pools, generally, than some of the Classic dungeons, where the bosses drop, like, 1 or 2 pieces of gear. It is a little bit larger of a pool of gear in the TBC dungeons, but still, the amount of times you're running the dungeon, you're just going to see them over and over again anyway. So, yeah. That is pants. Now, boots is another interesting slot where there isn't necessarily a lot here either, but there's more than some of the other spots. So outside of the heroic slave pens, these from Shattered Halls are actually very, very good. When you find stuff with like int, MP5, and good plus healing, just like in Classic, it's kind of like a match made in heaven, in my opinion. MP5 is an interesting stat. Some would argue that it's better than int in TBC. I just prefer int in general, but there is less. You will go typically less in TBC because of things like water shield, things like that. Overall, I think there's just a lot more to kind of, you get in a more modern rhythm, so to speak, when it comes to WoW. Not as much in the style of Classic, but I still really like int no matter what. But MP5's, it's debatably better in TBC than it is in Classic. I think it just works better. It scales better in TBC. Than it does in Classic. Like in Classic, it's definitely valuable, but I don't think it's as valuable as people think it is. So yeah. Anyway, rant aside, these are also good, and they have 2 sockets. They also give resilience rating, which is pretty funny. So kind of a worthless socket bonus overall, like for PvE, but still, 2 sockets is 2 sockets. So those are definitely good. These from the Arcatraz are Ellie ones, but still decent because they also have 2 sockets. Pure Thought from BWL is pretty funny. And then a cheaper leatherworking pair that again are Ellie, but they're there. And then MP5 shitty boots, and then these and stuff all from Akendune Quest. So yeah, I mean, all in all, like not too many options, but the options you have are decent and decently obtainable as well. So on to the rings. So rings here, there's really only a couple like really good Priebus rings that I would recommend. Kind of like in Classic where you had like Forge Ring Seal and the ring from Lower Blackrock, Rosewine Circle. Like you pretty much had those 2, and it was like those 2 only for the most part. That's kind of how I look at this, but there is a few more options. So really, the Mechanar ring is really, really good. 57 healing, 7 MP5. Then there's one from a Netherstorm quest that's really better in some ways just because of int. That's 55, 4 MP5, and then 13 int. But also a really good one as well from a quest in Shadowmoon Valley is the Mark of the Shatar, which is 64 healing and some spirit. So those are really the 3. So you do have, really those 3 as far as like most easily obtainable best items for sure. And obviously 2 of them come from quests. So even if you do dungeon grinding, like you can just go back. You're probably going to do the quests anyway for rep and some gold possibly. So those are always good options anyway. Like I know I went back and did several quests for Classic for things like Forge Ring Seal. So, that's always an option you can do. Outside of that, I mean, yeah, a lot of it's like Nax gear, the Pure Elementium, Ring of the Martyr, stuff like that. That's like a meme. So yeah, which, I mean, really, if you compare Ring of the Martyr to these 2, it's really not any worse, really, when you think about it. I mean, it's probably a little bit worse just because of the values, like, obviously 2 less MP5, a couple less plus healing, no int, anything like that. But like it's very close to both of these, which is kind of scary. But early on, especially Priebus specifically, I can't talk. A lot of the gear isn't that much better than a lot of the end game Classic stuff. just because the endgame classic stuff is so good, right? There's also this one from Jewel Crafting that is definitely not bad, especially for a green ring. So that's also another slot. But again, like, I don't like to promote the pieces that people can buy too much unless I think it's going to be like a lot on the cheaper end. So that's rings. Now trinkets is also pretty funny because bis for now I will say, if the alchemist stone is in the game, then that's like a bis item for sure. But I don't think the alchemy stone will be in at launch. It could be. They don't have it on this website, but it's, again, like, there's no way of knowing until we get our hands on like TBC beta. We see what's in the game, we see what's not. So if the alchemist stone is there, then it should definitely be on this list because it's definitively like the best trinket you could get. But obviously you have to be alchemy to use it. So just thought I'd preface that. But again, we'll touch on that in the next part when I cover all the other stuff. So Rejuve Gem, outside of that trinket, obviously, Rejuve Gem is just still bis in phase 1 for Resto. Like, it's actually insane that a BWL phase 3 classic item is still this good, but here we are. Yeah, it's actually insane. So, well, and more so for Shaman because of like how we value MP5 and stuff like that. Because you do have Ribbon of Sacrifice, which is an on use that increases healing, and it stacks. And then 73 healing, which is obviously more than Rejuve. And then you have Essence of the Martyr. So, but here you would have like 2 on use trinkets, which isn't necessarily bad, but I never really like having 2 on use trinkets. Because they both also have a passive. So yeah, but obviously ignoring the badge gear, you could, farm this maybe before TBC or in pre-patch or something. It would still definitely be worth it for sure. Outside of that, you have Lower City Prayer Book, which again is revered Lower City rep. So ignoring rep stuff, the Black Morass Scarab is probably your best option. It's really, really good. Very, very good. Eye of the Dead from Nax Keck. And then this one from the Blood Furnace, the Light Channeler, is also really, really good. And it just has a neat little on use to reduce your cost by 215 mana, which is not bad, really. So those are really the 2 that I'd say are really good. Now there is one, a green from Nagrand, that's also, some of these green items are really good for greens. 53 and then an on use of 213 healing for 20 seconds. One time obviously, but yeah, for 20 seconds every couple minutes or whatever. So yeah, it's actually really, really good. So these 3 are really your only 3 options outside of raiding or the Lower City Prayer Book, which obviously requires Revered. So there's not a lot of trinkets at all. Even with raiding, you really only add Eye of Magtheridon, which isn't even a healer item at all. So yeah, good luck getting that one. Then you have, again, 2 Nax, you have Rejuve and you have a Nax trinket. Then you have Ribbon of Sacrifice from Kara, which every healer in the game is going to want to get, pretty much. And then Essence of the Martyr, which you can get on your own time with badges, so which is still pretty much the best option. So again, let's say the Alchemist Stone isn't in the game, which I don't think it will be immediately. Then you really have, for Prebis, you have really these 3 trinkets, because everything after that is like, again, I mean, this is a good one, but this is from Gruul's Lair, so excluding that, Nelth tier, which is actually hilarious, another Nax trinket, which is the caster one, A Slave Pen's Heroic, which isn't even a healing item. Again, not a healing item. Oculus Trinket, so like Shard of the Scale, which is, Briarwood Reed. Like, I mean, we're getting into like Prebis for classic stuff at this point. So Trinkets is like a very scarce spot to get like good pieces in, especially early on. But just in general in phase one, it's like there's really not a lot of options out there. So, and then I guess we can go over Totem. I mean, there's really only a couple here. Because a lot of these are obviously from Arena, which we're not even going to count. The best one's from Kara, but obviously, for Prebis, that's like, a meme. This one's Ellie. This one is Enhancement. So, this one from Nagrand, which is a quest, is probably your best option. But it's really not even like that much better. Like, because the Kara one is so good because it's chain heal that these ones, like this one isn't even that much better than the one from AQ40 or the one from Skolo in Classic. Like, it's not that much better, all things considered, because the rest of these are like Ellie ones. This one is decent from the Underbog, which is a Water Shield one, which is not bad either. But it's really the Totem of the Plains or the Totem of Thunderhead, in my opinion. All the other ones are kind of like, yeah, a meme. So, or from vanilla. So, yeah, because the Karazhan one's just so good. So that, and I'll go ahead and show the second set here, that I built. So I have the shoulders from like Inner Grace that I went over before, from the Mechanar, Hollowed Crown, the other neck from that other quest, the Tailoring Cloak, the Void Slayer's Tunic, which I went over from the quest in Netherstorm. So yeah, just subbed in some different pieces, Essence Focuser, the Lamp, one more different ring, the Ashagun Trinket, White Men Pants, things like that. So you can see the plus healing in this one is 1449, 108 MP5. You can see all the stats here, whereas this one is 1671. So you can still get like really good plus healing in Prebis, for sure. Like it still definitely gets up there, even with some spotty items and some spotty slots. So now we will go ahead and we'll cover the phase one BIS items, and then just close on some final thoughts, things like that. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and check out the BIS pieces here. Now I did include some stuff like the White Men pieces that we went over earlier with like the set bonus, in case you're tailoring or something like that. And there's several other pieces that you can swap in place of that if you're a leather worker or tailoring or whatever, right? We already went over those pieces for the most part. So as far as helmet, the only real noticeable upgrades, I suppose, or the biggest upgrades, Naru Blessings is one of them, which is badge gear, 66 healing, 2 sockets, really good stats across the board. So that's that's really good. White Mend is still, pretty much optional BIS as well, up there. If you compare it with the Cyclone Headdress, which is your tier helm from Kara, you just compare the stats here. I mean, you get more int on the tier helm for sure, but you get 1 less socket, and just all in all, like, it's pretty similar overall, pretty even for the most part. And then Fathom Helm of the Deeps, so this is basically BIS. Now, if they end up releasing the engineering goggles or something like that at the start, those are also basically as good as this, which would be available if you are an engineer. But I don't think it'll be available at launch. It's not listed on this website yet, and I'm not really sure if it'll be available at launch. But if it is, That's definitely like just as good as this helmet, and it's insane. So this helmet comes from Doombringer, which is like a rare world boss mob that is right outside, I believe, Black Temple area in Shadow Moon Valley. So the thing with world boss pieces, well, with him and Kazak, they drop a lot of basically BIS items, but it is one of those things where it's not really going to be accessible for everybody. Everybody's not going to kill world bosses, let alone get gear from them or the gear that they need off them. Myself included, because I play on Fairlina and it's dominated by Alliance in the open world, so I'm not really banking on getting any of these either. But they're definitely there, and they're really, really good. So this is definitely the BIS helmet, barring, the engineering helmet or something like that being in the game. So yeah, this is really, really good. So that's as far as your helmets are concerned, pretty much. The best pieces really being White Mend Hood, Tier Helmet, and then the one from Doomwalker. Those three definitively. And obviously, like I mentioned, the engineering ones, if they are there. Neck pieces, Doomwalker also drops a potential BIS neck piece as well with 23 int, 75 healing. But there's also one from Karazhan off Nightbane, which is the optional boss in Karazhan, that pretty much is just as good, and actually has 11 MP5, but you miss out on the int, right? So, what's better, 23 int, 11 MP5? I mean, it pretty much just comes down to play style, in my opinion. So both of these are really good. Teeth of Gruul as well is really good. 46, 8 MP5, 21 int. And then pretty much everything we went over last time. This heroic piece from Old Hillsbrad's pretty good. Ambit of Fallen Gods still pretty good, all things considered. And then this one from Badges as well is also really, really good. So, anything along this top line here, even Natasha's, which we went over, they're all really, really good. But these two are definitely the best. The Amber Spur and the Charm of Presence, they're pretty much way above the other ones, in my opinion. So these are the two you want to shoot for. It's either from Nightbane or from Doomwalker, but Nightbane's obviously, a lot more accessible, I suppose, for more people. So shoulder pads is kind of interesting. So if you are a Mooncloth tailor and you can make the Primal Mooncloth shoulders, which are definitely BIS for phase 1, 7 MP5, 92 healing. You compare those with the Cyclone shoulders, even considering that the shoulders have 2 sockets, still not as good as the Primal Mooncloth shoulders. Those are definitely the best shoulders in the game, but obviously you have to be a tailor. So if you're not a tailor, Tier is probably your best option. Also, the other thing, so it will recommend like a lot of this PvP gear. The gear is not bad by any means. I mean, it's glad gear, but the thing is resilience is a thing in TBC, and resilience takes away stats from other items, or other slots, I should say, where stats would be. So it has a little less healing, has a little less int, a little less, MP5 crit, whatever, because it has resilience on it as well. So if it just had everything else plus resilience, it would just be OP. So that's kind of the balance of PvP gear. So they're definitely options. They're not bad for PvE necessarily, but they're not so good that I would recommend you use them over just the PvE gear. I mean, you compare them to the Tier shoulders right here, and they're definitely worse, for sure. So, that's something to consider, especially considering a lot of them have spell crit, which is a lot more valuable in PvP, but not really very valuable as much in PvE for Resto. So the Curator in Kara drops healing pieces for each armor type. So he drops mail, leather, cloth, and they're all healing shoulder. So they're all good. Like you can see the cloth ones here. Right below that, So these are definitely the best two, the cloth and mail. I mean, I always just like mail in general, even though in PvE a lot of the time it doesn't necessarily matter. I just like having mail anyway. So the Dragon Quake shoulder guards are really, really good. So they're definitely worth using. These are pretty much just as good, a little bit more MP5 and a little less plus healing. You know, hollowed is still good. These are the Ellie shoulders, so wouldn't really recommend those. And then these are the leather versions of the healing shoulders, which is pretty funny that really when you look at them, like they have what 66 healing, and if you you know look at the shoulders from MC Wild Growth, I think they have 62 from vanilla. So it is pretty funny. I mean, obviously the stats on these are a lot better than that. I just think it's funny that something from Karazhan has basically as much healing as something from Molten Core. I just think that's really funny. But yeah, so if you're not a tailor, definitely, like I said, the tier shoulders, or any of the curator shoulders for sure, are really your best options, for sure, I think. And depending on your comp in Kara, like the chance that you get shoulders that you can use, are actually pretty high. So, Cloak is the same, because like we went over last time, Life Giving Cloak is basically BIS, and it's just a world drop item. But outside of that, this cloak from the last boss of Kara is kind of better in some ways. It has more int, but it has a little less plus healing. It has 11 less and 2 more MP5, so it's close. It's not dramatically worse or anything like that. I still say Life Giving's better overall, but the Cloak of the Pure Hearted off Prince is actually really, really good too. There's also this one from the boss, the opera boss or whatever, and I think it's specifically, obviously you can tell, Red Riding Hood's cloak, so from that specific encounter in the opera. So this one's also pretty good, as well, for sure. And then we went over the White Remedy cloak, which is definitely not bad by any means. And then this one from Heroic, Hellfire Ramparts, actually is not bad as well. And then this one, Bishop's Cloak from the Badges, is definitely not bad either. There's quite a few cloaks, really. And then Heroic Crypts, this one also as well is very good. So really, like any of these ones across the top, if you use this website as reference, which I would highly recommend, like any of these ones are all pretty close to one another relatively. I'd still say these two for sure are better than the rest by a decent margin, but not enough that it's drastic or anything like that. So yeah, that's what I would recommend for those. For chest piece, once again, Primal Mooncloth is a BIS item here. It's definitely the best chest piece you can get in Phase 1, no doubt about it. And if you look at the 3 set for Primal Mooncloth, it's actually disgusting. So it's definitely worth using, in my opinion. It's definitely probably the best profession you can go early on for Phase 1, and if you want to change it after Phase 1 when some of that gear becomes a little less competitive, then that's definitely something you can do. But for early game, I'm almost positive I'm going to go tailoring, get the Mooncloth set as well as the White Men set, and kind of just go ham with both of those. They're just so good. Outside of that, tier chest is very, very good, with 3 sockets, 68 healing, 10 MP5. Now, another interesting piece is if you go tribal leatherworking, you also get this chest piece, which is really good as well. So really, for a lot of really good pieces, I would recommend either tribal leatherworking or mooncloth tailoring. One of the two, you get really good 3 pieces set. You also can get 2 off-piece sets for tailoring. It's white mend for leatherworking. I can't think of the name of it, but you get like a small 2 set as well. So both of those early on are a really good option for sure. And yeah, that and then like we went over before, pretty much just the stuff from before, like Earth Piece is really good. Nether Strike is decent if you're Dragon Scale, but that's more Ellie. So you're not really going to go that if you're Resto. So not really too many pieces added. Really just if you're not a profession like leatherworking or tailoring, really it's the tiered chest piece or bust, more or less. But this one from Kara is also really good. So really those two, and then the Earth Piece one, which we covered, any of those 3 are pretty solid overall, for sure. For bracers, the main thing is, again, with tribal leatherworking, is pretty much the best bracers you can get, more or less. But these ones from Keepers of Time Exalted are probably the best otherwise you can get. But these ones from Kara are very close. They're just less healing. Like overall stats, they're definitely worse, but they're still pretty close, all things considered, because of the MP5 and things like that. So yeah, in these spots, like definitely leatherworking shines. Dragon Scale for Ellie. And like I mentioned last time, like the Royal Redemption wrists are actually insane. When you compare them to these, like they're only a little bit worse than basically the best bracers that you can get in the game, which is actually crazy. So yeah, not really much in terms of where the bracers are, to be quite honest, other than that. So moving on to weapons, there's a lot to talk about here. Like we went over last time, there was so the Murmur mace, which we touched on a little bit, and then the Hand of Eternity from blacksmithing, like we talked about before, are pretty even. So after that, Nightbane drops a pretty good one that's a little bit better than those. And then Maiden also drops a good one that is a little bit better than Nightbane's. Then I guess the PvP one, which actually doesn't really sacrifice much in the way of stats for resilience, to be quite honest. Like all things considered, it's still pretty insane how good it is. But really the best weapon in the game is Light's Justice off Prince, who's the last boss of Kara. 382, really good stats across the board. And the thing is yeah, like I say, is even in Classic, I think this is true. But especially given your choice of weapons early on in TBC, it's better to have a one-hander, even if it's something like the Shockwave or Hand of Eternity or something like that. It's better to have a one-hander and a shield than it is to have like a two-handed staff, in my opinion. Just because of additional enchants on shields, but also just overall higher healing, like 382 versus the Crystal Pulse staff off Magtheridon is, it also has 382, 16 MP5. It has 50 int and 51 stam, which is pretty insane. So you are gaining a lot of stats overall, but you're losing, 75 plus healing to gain 10 MP5 and like 30 int. So they're pretty close. For sure, I'd say they're close. I mean, the amount of int and stam is pretty disgusting on the staff, not gonna lie. So it's not like it's not necessarily a win or lose, because Tears of Heaven is technically the best offhand, and it's not a shield. Um, but again, it just really depends. It's really close. The other one is off of Dumord Kazakh, which is the Exodar Life Staff, which is less healing inherently, not as much but you get 3 sockets, right? And then you get an additional 2 MP5. So this thing is pretty disgusting as well. But again, it comes off Lord Kazakh, who is a world boss in Hellfire Peninsula. You can only get to him if you have a flying mount, which I think in this day and age isn't really much of an issue. So yeah, I mean, these two staves are definitely comparable for sure. I don't want to think people that, you know, that initial statement's like, oh, don't use a staff. Like, you definitely can. Because it also depends on, like, if you get drops. Like, if you need a weapon and the staff drops, like, you're obviously going to take it. You're not just going to be like, oh, I'm going to wait, you know? So, those are pretty much everything. So, a couple maces, the staff from Nightbane, and yeah. So, yeah, I mean, even the PvP one's still really good for sure. So, that's pretty much the weapons. The offhands we went over a little bit. There's really not a lot. Now, end game, there's definitely more than Prebis for sure. The badges definitely give the best offhand in the game, which is Tears of Heaven, which is 75 healing and 6 MP5. No additional stats or anything, but what's pretty comparable to that is the Aegis of the Vindicator, which is off Magtheridon, which is definitely less healing, but you get 21 int plus an additional 12 from the enchant, so that's 33 int, and you also get 5 more MP5s. So plus it's a shield, and you know, I just like shields. You know, and you can be a little bit more beefy with 5.2k armor. That's always nice. This one from Shade of Iran and Kara is also very, very good. Don't get it twisted at all. So these 3 are like cuts above the rest. Any of these 3 and you're chilling. Because the next best after that's like the fucking shield off KT, which is still insane, which is actually more healing than on the Aegis, but just obviously not as much like MP5 or int or anything like that. So it's not as good, but it's still crazy how good this thing is. Same with Saf's right eye. It's actually pretty disgusting how good both of these items are. And then this one from Heroic Hellfire Ramparts, which we went over. This, if you're exalted with Cenarian Expedition, is really good. And then this one off Echo of Medivh as well. Or there's even this shield from Badges, which is definitely not bad. And then this one as well from Heroic. I think it's Underbog. So yeah, you do definitely get your fair share of options. Really, any of these are pretty solid, because after that, you're getting into like Sartura's Might, like the Life Giver, Noth's Frigid Heart, and Crystal Pulse Shield, which we went over before. So quite a few good offhands, and it's funny that the Nax items are so good. So even if you have those, honestly, even in Phase 1, if you don't replace it with anything in Phase 1 of TBC, you're still in pretty good shape if you have like a Shield of Condemnation at the end of the day. So gloves, really the best gloves in the game. Just like the Curator drops numerous shoulders of different armor types, so does Maiden and Kara drop different gloves of different types. That are all healing gloves. So the gloves of centering are definitely the best. I mean, they're male, first of all, but I think they overall have the best stat balance and everything. And you can compare them here with Cyclone gloves, which are the tier gloves, and they're basically just as good, but they have 2 sockets. So they're just definitely better. And if you like keeping a set bonus, if you want to have the set bonus of tier 4, which is, I believe, 24 seconds off of NS cooldown, then you can still have it because it's only a 4 set bonus and there's 5 pieces. So this is still like, if you want to be a set Andy, these are still like probably the best piece you can sub out, because the other tier pieces relative to their slot are better or closer to actual BIS than the gloves, in my opinion. So this would be the piece that you would want to swap out, personally. The leather ones are just as good about, but they don't have any MP5. These ones from Magtheridon are Ellie, or, you know, any other caster. And then these ones, which I touched on earlier from Leatherworking, are really good as well. And then these from the Huntsman as well are also really good as well. A really good socket bonus with these, +7 healing. So overall, definitely not bad. Even Doomwalker drops these, but these are like insane caster gear, so good luck getting those with hit and crit. And then these ones from the Botanica, which we went over earlier. So belt, once again, Primal Mooncloth is the third piece. That's just definitely BIS that you want to go with for sure. Same with the leatherworking pieces. If you're tribal leatherworking, is also the best one that you could do in this slot. Other than that, this one off Morose and Karazhan is actually really, really good. For sure, with 10 MP5, 59 healing, and good stats overall. This one is debatably better, but like basically even as far as I'm concerned. A little bit more healing, a little less MP5, even 2 more int. So basically the same, but pretty similar. And then, you know, at this point, you're pretty much getting into Ellie gear, except for this belt for a heroic dungeon, which comes off of the last boss of Old Hillsbrad. It's actually insane for a piece that comes out of a heroic dungeon. So, yeah, it's actually nutty how good it is. So this one is like just as comparable as the other ones, in my opinion, as well. So this is one that you definitely want to keep your eyes out for as well. Now, pants. We already went over White Mend pants, which I have here. But once again, it is Doomwalker that holds the king of the pants here. 118 with 12 MP5 and 3 sockets and an insane socket bonus. These pants will make you cream your pants because holy shit, these are insane. Outside of that, Echo of Medivh drops a pretty comparable pair in his own right. And it's male, so that does narrow down pretty much to like you and paladins that are gonna, you know, fight over this thing. So these are very comparable for sure. Because again, if you compare them to White Men pants, you're losing out on some MP5, but you're gaining int, you're gaining stam, you're gaining armor value, and you still have 3 sockets and the same socket bonus. So really, these are essentially better than White Mend, but with the White Mend set bonus, it's kind of worth it over these. But these are really good. So don't feel disheartened that you don't have like tailoring or whatever. Like, I'm not telling you to go tailoring. I have you know, in the next part of the video, we'll break it down in my next video, professions and all that. But yeah, don't sweat too much about it. This one from Kara as well off the Opera is really, really good. All these have like 3 sockets and are really solid. And then you have the tier pants, which are really, really good. They just don't have a socket. But without having a socket, I mean, they're still insane. I mean, 95, 11 MP5, a lot of int, a lot of stam. And that's how, again, a lot of these pieces are that don't have sockets they have insane stats because they don't have a socket. So, you know, it also just kind of depends on, like, you know, over time, the more gear you replace with more sockets, it is obviously going to get a little expensive, at least at the start. I'm sure sockets by the end of the expansion, or the ones that obviously drop from dungeons, aren't you know, quite as aren't going to be quite as like expensive or demanding as the game progresses. But early on in phase 1, some of them, you know, if you keep replacing gear with a bunch of sockets, it's probably going to get a little pricey. And then these are really good from Netherspite and Kara. There's just a lot of really good pants. And then this world drop that we went over earlier, that's 118 with no socket, but really, really good. And then these for a heroic drop on Steam Vault are actually really insane as well, with a really good socket bonus. So really, like, you have so many pant options. It's actually kind of crazy. Even Kazakh drops a pair, but again, they are not really worth mentioning because they're Ellie. So yeah, and then Heroic Old Hillsbrad again drops a pretty solid pair as well. So boots, Dumord Kazakh drops by far the best boots in the game, which again, seeing all the world boss loot makes me very sad. But maybe the Horde on Fairlina can bounce back, who knows. So yeah, these Gold Leaf Wild boots are definitely the best raw healing piece boots in the game for sure. Really good stats, good socket bonus, 2 sockets, 86 healing. So these off Echo Medivh are, they're definitely good. They're, second bis, really. But you notice how much worse they are, and they're basically the second best pair of boots, more or less, that you can get next to these. So it's actually insane, the difference. And then Honor boots, which again aren't bad, but definitely not as good. And then Shade of Iran also drops really good ones. Now these ones have MP5. So again, depending on how you like to gear your character, I personally do think MP5 scales a little bit better in TBC than it does in Classic. It's still really good in Classic for sure, but it just depends on how you want to gear your character. And then that's pretty much it outside of like the stuff we went over before, because the maiden boots in Kara are cloth, spellcaster boots and stuff like that. So those are pretty much all the boots that we're going to cover. Rings are interesting. There's a decent amount over the Prebis stuff. So obviously the Thrallmar Revered Ring, which we covered already a little bit in the Prebis, which is actually, pretty damn good considering it's a blue. Really the best ring overall, at least in terms of raw MP5 and healing, is the one off Prince, which is 68 and 12 MP5. No int or anything like that, but its stats are really good. That honestly doesn't matter too much. Dumord Kazakh drops a really good one as well, which is 75 and 23 crit. It's not quite as good for shamans. Honestly, having the MP5 is probably better overall because spell crit really doesn't matter that much. But it's still a really good ring if you're getting some Kazakh kills. So this one is off of Magtheridon's head. So just like Ani head, Neff head, you turn in the head of Magtheridon and you get, I believe it's all rings, for different, roles. So, this is the healer ring, and it's definitely, one of the best rings in the game for sure early on, with 55 healing, 8 MP5, 25 stam, and int. So really good for sure. The Thrallmar Band, which we went over, this one as well, from Heroic Mana Tombs, is really good. May not have as much healing or MP5, but it does have a lot of int, if that's something you like to stack more of. The rings we went over last time are really good. This ring, Band of Halos, from the badges, is actually really good too, but compared to some of the other badge gear, it's not quite as good. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. And then this ring from Kara is very good as well. So that's pretty much all the rings, and then the rings we talked about last time, obviously. And then you can Enchanter Rings if you're an Enchanter, with 20 healing each. So that's another like little bonus if you go enchanting in TBC, is you get 40 more plus healing. So we pretty much already went over trinkets. I mentioned last time if the Alchemist Stone is in the game, it's just bis period. But I don't really see it being. So speaking of badge pieces, Essence of the Martyr is definitely the best healing trinket in the game, barred none. I mean, 84 on use, which increases, basically at 300 healing for 20 seconds. It's absolutely insane. Rejuve Gem is really the second best trinket specifically for Resto Shaman, because Ribbon of Sacrifice is really good, but it's only a little bit more healing, and it is an on use, which if you have Essence of the Martyr, like, you don't really need 2 on-use trinkets. And Ribbon of Sacrifice drops out of Karazhan, and it is going to be a little bit more contested by, some of your other healers in your group. So if you have a Rejuve Gem from Classic, or you just want to farm it in TBC, or Eye the Dead or something like that is like also very comparable, then by all means definitely do it, because Essence of the Martyr and Rejuve Gem are going to be your 2 best friends. And then Lower City Prayer Book, which we touched on last time, which is still really, really good, with 70 healing, and, basically will reduce your mana by a little bit per cast for 15 seconds. So that are the trinkets. We went over the totem a little bit, but yeah, the one-off Maiden is insane because it's just the base amount of chain heal. So it's the only chain heal totem in the game, so it's definitely the one worth using for sure, because you still are definitely going to be a chain heal and in TBC. Maybe not quite as much in like every scenario, but it's still definitely going to be a thing. So it's definitely the best option for you, I think, because you're still going to use chain heal more than you use other things. And I'll just go ahead and show off a little bit of the other set that I made. So, kind of the same rings. A lot of the other stuff I touched on, Essence of the Martyr, Rejuve Gem, the Aegis, stuff like that. A little bit more of the tier pieces, opting for the gloves instead. So you can see the stats here, 1758 healing, 132 MP5, whereas the first set is 1807 healing and 128 MP5. So both pretty close to one another. And again, there's just a lot more like stuff that you can interchange if you have professions and whatnot. So that was a doozy of a video, probably like an hour and a half or something. I really haven't checked the recording time, but holy shit, that was really long. But I told you there was going to be a lot to get through, considering it's a whole new expansion worth of gear and the way things change and everything. So thank you guys very much for watching. In the next one, like I said, I'm going to be covering professions, enchants, all kinds of stuff. What new spells do we get in TBC? How's the playstyle differ? Stuff like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed. It was really fun researching all this stuff, putting together these sets, making the spreadsheet that I made for the next video, which you guys will see, which I will have public access to when that video comes out. So thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate all the love and support. Let me know what other kind of content you guys want to see. More TBC content coming down the pipeline. Thanks so much for the love and support, guys. Appreciate it. Love you. And I will see you guys next time. See ya.